Welcome to this explainer. Look, we're going to jump straight into a hidden psychological hurdle that's basically reshaping how developers, researchers, and creators are building our future right now. If you're out there investing serious time and sweat into AI-powered projects, you might actually be feeling this very specific underlying tension. It's not about whether the tech itself works, you know it does. It's about the completely unpredictable ground it's all built upon. When we talk about AI, right, society usually gets hung up on these massive existential questions. We're constantly debating if AI is going to take our jobs, if it's getting too powerful, or if we can even trust what it spits out. But while the whole world is arguing about those macro issues, independent creators are quietly wrestling with a much more immediate, practical, and frankly paralyzing fear. And that fear is simply, am I actually going to be able to afford my AI tools tomorrow? All right, let's get into section 1, the new AI fear. Let's uncover exactly what this unspoken anxiety is all about, because it's fundamentally changing how we approach development. The author of our source material calls this fascinating phenomenon AI range anxiety. And what's super interesting about this is how it takes what we'd normally think of as a software or coding challenge and totally reframes it as a resource problem. It's that creeping fear among independent builders that the tools they absolutely need to cross the finish line, well, they might become financially or technologically out of reach before they even get there. The term is just brilliant because it borrows straight from the early days of electric vehicles. Think back to early EV owners, right? They were constantly stressing over whether they had enough battery juice to actually reach their destination. Often, the car was perfectly capable of making the trip, but that sheer uncertainty completely changed their behavior. They drove slower, they planned shorter trips, they avoided risks. Today, AI developers are experiencing that exact same psychological block. They're changing how they build, not because their skills are lacking, but because of this deep uncertainty about whether their budget and access will actually survive the journey. So let's move on to section 2, speed versus dependency. Now, to understand how this anxiety builds, we need to clear up a major misconception right off the bat. Actually, scratch that. This is a massive misconception. This is absolutely not about developers losing their edge or, getting lazy. The author, who is a highly experienced developer themselves, makes this crystal clear. This isn't about becoming dependent in a way that makes you incapable of working without AI. They can still write the software, they can design complex databases, and they can solve intense technical problems the traditional way. They've spent decades doing exactly that. The core competency hasn't gone anywhere. So what did change? Velocity. Traditionally, an ambitious project demanded months of grueling trial and error. Today, AI hasn't replaced the developer's knowledge. Instead, it acts like this always available, completely tireless research partner that compresses months of heavy lifting into mere weeks. You can debate concepts, challenge them, and refine architectures continuously at absolute lightning speed. It's a total game changer. Which brings us to section 3, building on borrowed foundations. Here's the catch, and it's a huge one. This incredible world-changing speed boost, it exists entirely at someone else's discretion. You're out there building incredible things, but you're doing it on borrowed foundations. Think about it. Every serious AI project today relies on services owned by a tiny handful of companies, and those services are incredibly volatile. Sure, models improve, which is awesome, but pricing can change overnight. Boom, usage limits suddenly appear out of nowhere. Older, reliable models just get retired with barely any warning, and capabilities are constantly morphing. Imagine sinking thousands of hours of your own time into developing these intricate workflows, only to just watch the ground shift right beneath your feet. And this leads to a really heartbreaking realization for a lot of creators. The project doesn't fail because your code breaks or your logic is flawed. It stalls out because the uncertainty of what access will cost in 2 or 3 or 5 years makes budgeting literally impossible. The project is still 100% technically possible, but overnight, a pricing tweak or new token limit makes it completely financially unrealistic to finish. Let's look at section 4, the threat to innovation. We really have to ask, who actually pays the highest price for this uncertainty? Because there's a massive divide happening here. Huge established corporations, they can easily absorb higher subscription costs or some unexpected spike in token pricing. To them, it's just another line item on a spreadsheet. But independent researchers, hobbyists, solo academics, they operate totally differently. These folks are working evenings and weekends, investing massive amounts of their own time rather than massive amounts of money. When prices fluctuate, they don't have some giant corporate treasury to fall back on. They just get priced out, plain and simple. The author actually brings up their own experience with a really complex research endeavor, the PFVME project, as a perfect direct example of this whole dynamic. Affordable AI dramatically lowered the barrier to entry for them. It acted as this amazing sounding board that challenged assumptions and refined architectures, essentially replacing the need for a massive, well-funded university lab. Without that affordable access, the project wouldn't have been entirely impossible, but it would have been drastically, painfully slower. And that brings us to a quote that really hits the nail on the head for this entire explainer. Innovation doesn't just depend on intelligence. It depends on access. I mean, really think about that. History shows us over and over that some of the most world-changing ideas come from outside big corporations. They come from hobbyists tinkering in their garages who could just afford to experiment. If we price out these independent creators by trapping them in a constant state of range anxiety, we risk losing entirely new discoveries before they even see the light of day.
Okay, our final section, Section 5, Designing for the Unknown.
So how do we actually survive on this shifting ground? If we literally cannot predict token costs, or subscription fees, or fair use limits 10 years from now, how do we keep building? Well, the author suggests a powerful shift in mindset. Yes, it's great that open-weight models are getting better, and competition is rising, for sure. But the ultimate survival strategy for developers is to take the wheel. The answer isn't to be paralyzed by AI range anxiety. The answer is to acknowledge it and actively build resilience directly into your software architecture. It really comes down to designing for the unknown with a few crucial practical steps. First, keep your workflows portable so you aren't permanently locked into a single AI provider's ecosystem. Next, whenever it's practical, experiment with local models that run on your own hardware. That way, you aren't relying on a cloud API at all. By designing adaptable software, developers can vastly reduce the blast radius when platforms inevitably change. You can't eliminate the uncertainty, right? But you can absolutely mitigate the fatal impact it has on your work. Which leaves us with a critical, lasting question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. Is AI range anxiety just a temporary growing pain of a young, chaotic industry? Or is it an early flashing warning sign that we absolutely must fiercely protect affordable, open access to these powerful tools? Because if we don't, we might just be building a future where the ability to innovate belongs exclusively to those with the deepest pockets. So take a look at your own projects today, consider your dependencies, and ask yourself, how can you start building resilience into your work right now?